All right, I'm the Flat Rate Master, and well, we're going to go back in history to when I started and how things have changed. Not so much with technology and that kind of stuff. We know that's vastly different, but we're going to talk about some of the differences in the industry and how things have changed over that time. Paper manuals. Back in my day, everything was paper. You had a shelf in the office of all these manuals, paper, didn't matter what you needed to look up. There was always gonna be a dirty fingerprint over what part of the manual you needed. In recent history, about 11 years ago, I was working at a shop. The owner was a former Volvo technician. He had all of the paper manuals going back, on Volvos for his entire career. And I'm like, great, I need to diagnose this cruise control system. It was a factory add-on. So I'm like, okay, so I'm going through that generation, looking through all the manuals. The one he didn't have was on the cruise control system. Made that diagnosis so much harder because I had to figure out what every wire did because I didn't have a wiring diagram because ALLDATA didn't have it either, hence why I was looking at paper manuals. And that was always one of the problems. Oh, I need this diagram. Oh, that's the one book we didn't buy. It happened a lot. Or that book was tore up or unreadable, etc. Nowadays you just go online, you look it up, you're done. Having to go through table of contents for that vehicle, etc., just sucked. Most of you will never know the utter hatred. Every technician back in the day that dealt with feedback carburetors. Those were early electronic controlled carburetors. If you don't know what a carburetor is, it's a calibrated fuel leak. Add electronics to it is a horrible idea, and it was a horrible idea in practice. They failed often. There was very little parts available for them. They were very difficult to repair. Cars wouldn't run because of feedback carburetors, because you couldn't get a feedback carburetor, or you couldn't get a feedback carburetor to work. That was one of the things about reman carburetors. 9 times out of 10, that was your only option. You couldn't get new, and 9 times out of 10, out of the box, they didn't work right. Where the float was set too high, set too low, etc. And you'd have to go into the carburetor and fix the remanufacturing process. And the problem is 9 times out of 10 at that point, the bushings for the throttle shafts were so worn out, you had a massive vacuum leak. Quadrajets. Manual windows. Actual gears in the windows. Back when I started, power windows were extremely rare. Everybody just cranked them up. And oddly enough, in Georgia, where I've worked as professionally as a technician my entire career, back then, air conditioning systems, we ripped a ton of those out. Destructively ripped a ton of those out because nobody would fix it. They didn't want to put a belt on it. So you just, cut the lines and throw the compressor in the spare metal bin, and literally cutting AC lines to make it quick to get out because they didn't want to deal with it, or do-it-yourselfers would do the same thing. And, nowadays people will have grinding brakes, tires bald as snot, and they don't care. They will spend $1,500, $2,000 to fix their AC before they do anything else. It wasn't like that back then. I guess people were tougher. Just roll the window down. My first vehicle with working AC, to put it in perspective, was a 99 C2500 that I bought on payments. Every other vehicle besides my second car was bought with cash. Never had working AC until the 2000s. So that's how rare air conditioning was back in my day in Georgia. I didn't have working air conditioning until the 2000s. So very different than today. So let's talk about tools. Back then, it was air on everything. You were literally laughed at if you had a drill that plugged into a socket. There were very few extension cords in a shop back then. You know, you didn't have an AC machine at most shops. Again, getting back, nobody would fix their AC. You had air drills, you had Impacts, air, you had air ratchets. You know, and a lot of people still hold on to that even in this day. But you didn't have power drills, you had air drills. You know, somebody on my stream the other day mentioned butterfly impacts. I had one of those. Not so much anymore, but they were very common back in the day. Incandescent drop lights. You either had the big old mag light, or when they first came out, the Makita, you know, big, huge, bulky, dim as a battery powered one that was 9.6 volts. I remember that. Or you used incandescent bulbs on a drop light that broke, burned you every day. You dropped it. I mean, it literally would have cases of bulbs for those incandescent lights, because you'd hang it up, you'd knock it, it'd pop off, and you'd be cleaning up glass. Nobody was walking around back then with a flashlight you could keep in your shirt pocket. Just didn't happen. You used incandescent drop lights, and they sucked. Matt came out with a drop light that was fluorescent, and I'm like, oh yeah, all over that. Give me that, give me that, give me that. And I mean, this was still when your flashlights were still using batteries that you had to buy and replace. So I used that for many years until it finally broke. But that's the thing, is incandescent drop lights should have been banned from shops a very long time because they're such a fire hazard. Now we got to talk about the rest of the tools. When I started going hardcore, pawn shops, tool trucks, and Sears. You know, every part store had the cheap Taiwanese socket set that were just utter garbage. Like if you put a decent ratchet on there, you could literally crack the sockets by hand. I mean, the ratchet would break before that, but the sockets were just useless. You didn't have the options you have nowadays. I mean, now you can pretty much build your tool collection on Amazon and have a great tool set. Didn't have those options back in the day. So I hope this video was interesting at least. As always, thanks for watching. I am the Flat Rate Master.